This is an overview of brief functional behavior assessments, also called FBAs. They're also called simple or practical FBAs. So some objectives for this video to describe the core terms of FBA: setting events, which occasion certain behavior; antecedents, which we also call triggers; observable or measurable behaviors; reinforcing consequences, which maintain behaviors over time; and function, which is the reason or purpose. So you've seen this quite a few times in this class. And over on the left, we would be considering the universal team. So that is the focus of SED 581 if you've taken that. But then we move on to secondary systems teams, which is the focus of this class. And this diagram is really to put in context of where we've been and where we're going. So we take a look at the secondary teams who uses process data, determines overall intervention effectiveness. Often you are implementing check in, check out, social academic instructional groups, groups with individual features, to the extent working self-management, and then fading back to universal. So you're doing these interventions, and sometimes there's no response, or there's a worsening or substantial or interfering behaviors. And a brief FBA, you would collect data to further problem solve, and it becomes more individualized, but it's still a step before a complex FBA. It is a functional behavior assessment. It's a process for identifying the events that reliably predict and maintain problem behavior. So in behaviorism, behavior responds in predictable ways. And so we learn under what conditions and things that tend to maintain the behavior, such as antecedents or environment. Oftentimes consequences can reinforce the behavior. So we look at patterns over time to identify predictors or the maintaining consequences that's allowing that behavior to continue. So let's take a look at practical FBAs or simple FBAs, brief FBAs versus a complex or comprehensive FBA, which you would see at the Tier 3 level. So this is the focus of this class, and especially this lecture. So simple FBAs are for students with mild to moderate problem behaviors that are not dangerous and occurring in many settings. It's relatively simple and efficient process to guiding behavior support planning, and it can be conducted by teachers, counselors, administrators within the building. Whereas a complex or comprehensive FBA focuses more for students with moderate to severe behavioral problems, may be dangerous, and or occurring in many different settings. A complex FBA is more time intensive. That allows for a lot more in-depth record review, family-centered planning, and collaboration with agencies outside of school for wraparound services. So a complex FBA, typically districts hire outside or have their own school psychologists or hire board-certified behavioral consultants to come in and conduct these. So assessing predictable relationships between the environment and behavior. FBA involves gathering information from all those who know the student. So you're going to be looking at data across the day, not just in one class, but you're going to be looking at what the student's day looks like. And this tells us the antecedents, and sometimes we can begin to discriminate similarities and differences and make predictions. We all know that sometimes a student will engage in a certain behavior in one class and not the other. So this allows us to really take a look at that. It helps us determine why problems occur. So we also need to consider things such as medication, sleep, relationships with peers. And the purpose is to get the information necessary to create a successful plan, which is tied to the function, because we know that a function-based plan is most effective. Functional relationships can be determined by observing patterns in behavior over time. Functional relationships between what? So predictors reliably occasion the behavior. Sometimes these could be setting events or antecedents. A setting event is more of a distal trigger, and which is a condition that makes behavior more likely. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Behaviors, and then there's the antecedents. We'll go back for a second, which are quick triggers, and sometimes can be pretty easy to predict, but also sometimes can be harder. And then we know that there's behaviors and consequences, which are important to identify to determine if there's a maintaining consequence, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But then there's also private events, thoughts and feelings. So sometimes, even for adults, we should take a mental audit. Am I taking this personally? Am I remaining neutral? And it's important when we're writing these plans and working with these students to not imply how a student is thinking or feeling, because that's hard to quantify and you can't observe it. In behaviorism, in applied behavior analysis, they don't use a whole lot of thoughts and feelings in this analysis. That's more of a different kind of psychological approach that isn't really found so much in ABA. Cognitive therapy that's the word I was trying to think of. Thank you. All right, so consequences. Let's take a look at that for a second. So we've got some terms here. We have positive reinforcement. This is where we're adding something which strengthens the behavior. Okay, this could strengthen the intensity, the magnitude, or the frequency. We have negative reinforcement, which is removing a stimulus, making the behavior stronger, usually aversive, something that they don't like, so taking away recess, okay? Punishment, either positive or negative, weakens the behavior. So anything that weakens the behavior, we consider punishment. And extinction is an important term when shaping behavior. So extinction is when you withhold. So for example, withholding attention from a student who we know the function of their behavior is to gain adult attention. So it's important when you are using extinction to also add something in there. So extinction plus differential reinforcement, okay? So to go back to my example, we have a student who we know is the function of the behavior is to gain adult attention. So you are ignoring the unwanted behavior, but then the differential reinforcement, you are giving rich praise for when the student is exhibiting behaviors that you want to see. So when the student raises his hand and displays appropriate behavior, you're giving some really rich attention and praise, okay? So it's really important, just that takeaway is to not use extinction in isolation. So let's look, So let's take a look at an example here. When Gina misses her 12:30 medication and teachers present multiple task demands, she makes negative self-statements and writes profane language on her assignments. Teaching staff typically send her to the office with a discipline referral for being disrespectful. So here's the setting event. So she misses a 12:30 medication. Maybe there was a parent conflict. That wasn't in the example, but let's just use our imaginations here, okay? So a setting event is what we could also call a precipitating factor. So this is something that staff may have little or no control over within a student's day, okay? So then we have the antecedent. And the antecedent in this scenario was teachers make multiple task demands. So that is the quick trigger. That is immediately triggering her. The response or the behavior, Gina makes self-negative statements and writes profane language. And the consequence was that she got sent to the office, okay? So we could, if this were happening over time and we got a lot of data to support this, we could determine that this allows this kind of consequence is the maintaining consequence, which maintains her behavior because it allows her to escape from difficult tasks, okay? So to be able to set something like this up, we would need multiple examples with data collection, okay? So let's do another one here. What is the interfering behavior? So there's this thing called the alien test, which when you describe the behavior in a way to distinguish what was the behavior and what wasn't, okay? So as though you're describing it to an alien, okay? There's the alien test, all right? So it's specific. It punches Pierre in the arm, doesn't complete assignments, okay? It avoids constructs. So lazy, angry, bad attitude, depressed. Those are not specific. Those are constructs, okay? It's observable. It's measurable. So measurable in frequency, rate, and duration. So a frequency can be a count. A rate can be over a certain period of time, how many times. And duration, how long does it last, okay? So to go back to constructs, because I see this a lot, they're very vague and we want to be behaviorally specific, okay? So we want to avoid constructs, okay? Oops. And to go back to measurable, it's really important to be able to get a baseline so that when you, after the intervention plan has been established and ongoing for a little while, you can go back and compare. So let's pick out some constructs here. Shortly after the midterm grades came out, a teacher referred Robert to the school social worker, describing Robert as inattentive in the classroom, poorly motivated, and having low self-esteem. The social worker wondered what Robert did or said that led to this description. So the first thing I pick out there is inattentive, okay? So when you say inattentive, then what were they doing? Poorly motivated to do work or socially? Was he not on task? And the low self-esteem, that's quite an assumption because those are private events that we just talked about. Those are, those may be what you are interpreting, but you can't tell what his thoughts are. So what are those behaviors that lead teachers to identify that student with that construct, I wonder? Here's some excellent examples. So we have a vague statement on the left and a behaviorally specific measure on the right. She has low self-esteem. Okay, that's not very specific. Let's try, she says, I'm not as smart as my friends. He exhibits hostility. He throws his toys. He is really depressed. He stays in bed 12 hours a day and said life isn't worth living. He's irresponsible. He draws pictures instead of completing his writing. She is rude. She interrupts others who are talking. He is angry all the time. He has frequent arguments with his peers. Poorly defined behavior will come back to haunt you. So data collection and problem solving are, when poorly defined, different people, collect different sets of data. So you need to go back to the drawing board and collect more data. So you need to ask yourself, what am I seeing or hearing and how often? Sometimes it's really important that you sit together as a team and define those behaviors explicitly so everybody knows what you're talking about. So now we're moving on to predictors. So setting events, which are considered slow triggers, are distant and proximal, and antecedents are those fast triggers. And some words that you might use to describe fast triggers or antecedents are prompts, triggers, cues. So setting events may happen in or outside of the classroom, such as home, school, or community. These are conditions that increase the likelihood that the behavior of concern will occur. So some examples are oversleeping, not having breakfast, forgetting their medication, a conflict at home, on the bus, in the hallway, in the classroom. So think about yourself. When are you most likely to be more triggered? We also think of somatic complaints, earaches, allergies, etc., which can occasion behavior more frequently. I myself, when I get really hungry, that's a slow trigger for me. I consider that one of my big ones. People that know me know that I get hangry, so it's really important to keep me fed. Antecedents. So these are discriminative stimuli, discrete stimuli that occasions behaviors, stimuli that are present immediately before each performance of behavior can come to serve as a discriminative stimuli. Okay, so you think of Pavlov's dog. Okay, so rings the bell and the dog starts to salivate. Okay, capable of producing the behaviors with which they are associated and signal the opportunity for reinforcement or punishment given the occurrence or non-occurrence of behavior. So these are things that can be paired to take on the same cueing as the original stimulus, such as Pavlov's dog. So when those things happen, behavior happens and it signals behaviors. Signals that reinforcement is available or escape. So some examples of antecedents are presentation of assignments that are too difficult, sometimes teasing or sarcasm, loud noise. They may be consistent when someone asks him to do his writing task. These are reliable predictors or antecedents. They may be unique to one situation. So when Mr. Jones asks him to do a writing assignment versus when Mrs. Smith asks him to do a writing assignment. So sometimes these antecedents are tied to a staff person. So for example, another example, a presence of a young substitute. So this for many students is a signal to engage in behaviors, okay? Let's take a look here. All right, so we've got this mailman here, okay? And he sees an angry dog. And so this is his trigger to run away and get away from the dog, okay? So then he's escaping the aversive situation. And we all know who this guy is. So this is a complete pathway, which will allow us to see the whole picture of the behavior. If you just saw this mailman running, maybe you thought he was, running for exercise. But when we see the whole complete pathway, we're able to see the whole picture of the behavior, okay? So let's take a look at understanding functions, okay? So this might require a little bit of detective work to figure out what is maintaining the behavior. So these are patterns or predictions which can yield a more effective intervention. So functions. We've got legitimate and non-legitimate functions, okay? Legitimate functions such as getting something, attention, tangible, an event, avoiding something, such as attention, an event, a person, or self-stimulation, like hair twirling, rocking, etc. So we all know that sometimes, you know, behavior is to get something, avoid something, but let's talk about self-stimulation for a minute, okay? So self-stimulation is increasing or decreasing arousal to stay in that, happy place. So think of yourself and you're sitting and you are taking a test, and maybe you are someone who kind of taps their foot or rocks in their chair or twirls their hair. It's one of those things that's like a self-soothing thing. All right, so now let's move on to non-legitimate functions. So these are what we want to stay away from in the analysis. So we want to stay away from identifying the function as being power, okay? That's not specific, and all behaviors for power. Control, again, not specific, and all behaviors for control. Didn't take his meds. Well, that's an antecedent, not a function. Or I've heard this before, crazy parents. Again, that's not a function, okay? So power control over what? This can be funneled back to legitimate functions, but you have to be very specific. So here we have an interfering pathway, and this is just a nice little flow chart that lays out reinforcing consequences of behavior. So we can see that environmental variables or individual or internal variables. If they're environmental variables, are they followed by social attention preferred activities, or is it followed by the avoidance or withdrawal from these things? Okay. So this kind of gives us a little pathway to kind of figure out, is it positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, or automatic reinforcement? Excuse me. So this is just a silly little cartoon here. And so the class was quietly doing its lesson when Russell, suffering from problems at home, prepared to employ an attention-getting device. So maybe students will provide him with rich attention. There will be a large reaction from the teacher. So this is just a little fun. So some examples of functional. So we've got the setting condition, which is slow or distal. That's also called the setting event. The antecedent or trigger will then oftentimes result in the behavior of concern, and then access or avoidance to reinforce the behavior. How is it being reinforced or maintained? So you can't add the intervention until we know how the behavior is being maintained, okay? So let's take a look. So what is the setting or condition in academic work setting? The antecedent or trigger is no direct teacher attention. So the student engages in disruptive noises, and then the teacher provides attention. So the replacement behavior that you want to teach is to raise hand and wait quietly, okay? So things to consider when looking at this setting condition is the curriculum. Is this too difficult? Do you need to adjust it or make accommodations? The time it's being delivered. Maybe you need to reteach expectations and provide examples. Maybe you need to seek help with those routines. Maybe consider physical arrangement of the class or the proximity between the teacher and student. Okay. So this is where before the behavior, there needs to be some prompt or cueing. So this is how to prompt engagement to get ahead of the behavior or pre-correct or prime the behavior. Okay. Oops. And then after the student does raise his or her hand quietly, you need to richly reinforce that. And that's how to teach alternative behavior. Look at another one. So the setting event is in an academic classroom. The antecedent is any request to do to work on academics, and the behavior is rude, defiant, refuses, ignores, and the maintaining consequence is to escape academic work in class. Maybe the student is kicked out of class, which we see often. Okay, so again, and here is the replacement behavior to be taught: to complete work, to earn some free time. So they're still accessing that, maintaining that consequence, the same functional equivalent. Okay, so they're still escaping the academic work in class, but they have to do a little bit of work first. Okay, so you need to consider the curriculum, the time in which this class occurs. Maybe you need to reteach expectations, provide examples, work on those routines, work on engagement, consider the physical arrangement, provide prompts. So, okay, so finish these 5 problems, and then you get to have some free time. Maybe you are adjusting the workload into increments. So it's really important there where it says prompts to pre-correct for social behaviors, and then provide some rich reinforcement there. So that allows the same maintaining consequence. Okay. So that's all I have for you today. Again, I'll see you on the boards.